complicit in genocide, profiting from occupation. The scathing assessment of a United Nations expert calling out global companies for their role in Israel's actions in the occupied Palestinian territories. So, which firms were identified in the report, and could they be held liable under international law? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finnegan. The UN Special Rapporteur says that some of the world's largest companies are complicit in and profiting from Israel's actions in the occupied Palestinian territories. Francesca Albanese's landmark report identified Microsoft, Amazon, and Google as just some of the major US tech firms listed as being part of a, quote, joint criminal enterprise in helping Israel sustain the genocide in Gaza. But UN reports like this one have no legal power, and Israel has rejected Albanese's findings as groundless, saying that it would join the dustbin of history. So will big companies, despite their financial interests, start to question their ties with Israel? And will consumers around the world begin to apply commercial pressure on the firms implicated? We'll put all that to our guests in just a moment, but first a report from Kulsum Sharif.
A scathing report by a United Nations expert on why Israel's war on Gaza has extended for more than 20 months and has killed more than 56,000 Palestinians. UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese says Israel's genocide continues because it's profitable.
If the genocide has not stopped, it's not just because there has always been an economy of the occupation. It's because the economy of the occupation has turned into an economy of genocide. And so there have been people and organizations that have profited from the violence, the killing, the maiming, the destruction in Gaza and in other parts of the occupied Palestinian territory.
Albanese's report is based on more than 200 submissions from states, human rights defenders, companies and academics, and identifies 60 global companies as directly or indirectly supporting Israel's genocide and its illegal occupation of the West Bank. It names US tech giants for providing technology to track and target Palestinians, construction companies for providing Israel equipment to demolish Palestinian homes and expand illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, tourism firms for listing rental properties in those settlements. It also names arms manufacturers for selling weapons to Israel to bomb Gaza, and financial institutions that the report says have been underwriting Israeli treasury bonds throughout the conflict.
In the past 20 months, while the Israeli army and accompanied by settlers was devastating Palestinian lives and landscapes, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange soared by 213%, amassing over 220 billion in market gains.
The UN Special Rapporteur has called for businesses to sever ties with Israel and for countries to stop selling arms to it.
The very fact of engaging in something that concerns and translates into economic gain and profits, it's problematic, lest the companies and their executives are ready to face responsibility and even criminal liability.
On the ground, Palestinians in Gaza continue to be killed and starved. An Associated Press report says American security contractors working for the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation used live ammunition and stun grenades on people waiting to get food. The Israeli US-backed group, which has been accused of weaponizing food, has denied the report. More than 600 Palestinians have been killed in mass shootings since the GHF began operations in Gaza at the end of May. For weeks now, rights groups have warned the controversial food distribution scheme is forcing people to choose either starvation or death. Kulsum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Ramallah, we're joined by Omar Barghouti, the co-founder of the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement. From Seattle in Washington, we're joined by Vanya Agrawal, a former software engineer at Microsoft who resigned earlier this year. And from the Canadian city of London, Ontario, Michael Link, human rights lawyer and former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories. A warm welcome to you all. Michael, let's start with you. Israel's mission in Geneva told the Reuters news agency that Albanese's report is legally groundless, defamatory, and a flagrant abuse of her office. You're the man who'd know. Is it?
No, not at all. This is a landmark report by a UN Special Rapporteur. I've never seen a report coming from a Special Rapporteur that is so detailed, so deep into the issue, and one that has received so many external submissions with respect to this. The only problem I have with the report is that it's limited by the UN word count limit of 10,700 words. As the report itself says, it only scratches the surface of the kind of international corporate cooperation and complicity with Israel with respect to its war on Gaza and its ongoing occupation of the Palestinian territory.
Omar, Albanese's report says that while life in Gaza is being obliterated and the West Bank is under escalating assault, this report shows why Israel's genocide continues because, the report says, it is lucrative for many. What's the BDS movement's view on the report? Why hasn't the BDS movement had more impact on some of these companies that are singled out in this report?
In fact, UN Special Rapporteur Albanese meant that this is a key factor. It's not the only factor that corporations are profiting from it. The BDS movement, since its inception in 2005, has been campaigning against state complicity, corporate complicity, and institutional complicity, because in our analysis, without ending this international complicity, there is no way to end Israel's crimes against Palestinians and to dismantle what's now 77 years of settler colonialism and apartheid, not to mention military occupation and now genocide. So what this report is telling us is that this depth of complicity of those corporations in enabling apartheid and genocide and occupation and profiting from it, in using Palestinians as a testing ground for their technologies, especially military companies, tech companies, and others, is now being recorded by a UN Special Rapporteur, a human rights expert. And this is very important. As Michael said, this is almost unprecedented in its scope. So it's putting those companies on notice. You, as companies, your executives are now possibly criminally liable. If you continue doing this business and enabling Israel's international crimes against Palestinians, you will be criminally liable. That's very important for us in the BDS movement as we pursue accountability.
Vanya, Microsoft, the company that you used to work for, is one of the priority targets for the BDS campaign. You're now an organizer with the No Azure for Apartheid campaign, referring to Microsoft's Azure cloud offerings. You sent an email to all staff before leaving the companies, which made headlines right around the world at the time. Why did you leave? Remind us what you said in that email.
Yeah, that's a great question. Around the time that I protested, Microsoft was celebrating its 50th anniversary with a lot of messaging centering around its philanthropy and how it drives tech for change and tech for good. And we wanted to call out the hypocrisy of Microsoft in that messaging, as it knowingly and willingly was providing the digital cloud and AI weapons that were behind the continuation of apartheid and genocide in Palestine. As part of our protest, we called out Microsoft CEOs and called them what they were, which is war profiteers. And these companies are digital weapons manufacturers. And as part of our protest, we sent out mass emails to internal Microsoft employees with the goal of letting everybody in the company know what Microsoft's role is in the genocide and how complicit it is. Alongside putting pressure on the executives to answer its calls from employees who are calling them out, to protect their employees' voices that they have been suppressing, and to call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, along with cutting ties from Israel and divesting from and ending the support of the Israeli military.
All right, so what is the No Azure for Apartheid campaign about? Are you urging consumers to boycott Microsoft?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'm an organizer with the No Azure for Apartheid campaign, and we are a worker-led campaign that is demanding an end to Microsoft's complicity in Israel's apartheid and genocide in Gaza. So our goals are fourfold. We want to demand Microsoft to cut all ties from the Israeli military, which means stop providing the cloud and AI technology that is powering the surveillance, the targeting of, and the control of Palestinians in Gaza, and to call on Microsoft, as well as other tech companies, because they are clearly all complicit, to demand an immediate ceasefire and to protect their workers who speak out. We've seen over months now, as employees continue to call out these companies for being complicit in the genocide, they respond with suppression, doxing, retaliation, and firing their employees. And there's a clear discrepancy between how they treat pro-Palestinian voices versus Zionist voices within the company. And so we demand these companies to protect all freedom of speech and to protect the pro-Palestinian voices and to answer to the accountability that these employees are demanding from them, to divest, to cut ties, and to call for a ceasefire.
Okay. Michael, the report says the complicity exposed by this report is just the tip of the iceberg. Ending it will not happen without holding the private sector accountable, including its executives. The report points to precedents in holding corporations legally accountable for human rights abuses that they enabled, including the prosecution of German industrialists at the Nuremberg trial after World War II and the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Should corporate executives now be worried? Could they soon find themselves hauled before a court and have to account for their decision-making?
That's the path that this report is advocating. And as the report points out, and as you point out, there are precedents for this. There's been a number of trials over the last 25 years with respect to corporations being held criminally liable or corporately liable for environmental crimes, for supplying nerve gas to Saddam Hussein's Iraq, for providing funds for armed groups to protect French cement companies in Africa. All of this sets the precedent for going after these companies if the states from which these companies are domiciled aren't going to take action themselves. I mean, we have several different legal options where corporations could be held accountable. One is through arrest warrants coming from the International Criminal Court. If the International Criminal Court would start to do investigations based on Francesca Albanese's report for these corporations directly aiding and assisting in war crimes or crimes against humanity or genocide, all of which are prohibited by the Rome Statute of 1998, which created the International Criminal Court. There's also possibilities in domestic courts as well. Most of the countries that belong to the International Criminal Court have incorporated the Rome Statute into their own domestic legislation, which means virtually every country in Europe, as an example, has laws on their domestic books which prohibit assistance with respect to war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. So if these countries themselves have the political will to be able to pursue that, there is their obvious avenue. And as well, individuals as plaintiffs, if they can show that they've been personally harmed, either as an individual or as a class of plaintiffs, could sue these companies in their domestic courts over the harm they cause through violating international human rights law as well. So all of these possibilities are there. It requires both political will, it requires actions by civil society organizations, and alas, it probably also requires money to be able to fund these kinds of litigation.
I wonder whether consumers have any power in this too. Omar, Albanese says that she wants all of us to be able to read her report, to be able to make informed decisions on what they purchase, what companies they deal with. How can the likes of me and anyone watching or listening take individual action if we feel we need to, and make our voices heard, and to put pressure on these companies?
Yes, Ms. Albanese calls on trade unions, lawyers, civil society, citizens to press for boycotts, divestment, sanctions, justice for Palestine, accountability. That's exactly what she's saying in her report. Yes, indeed. The BDS movement for 20 years has been building people power, as we believe our theory of change is build power from the grassroots to the grass tops to affect policy change. So those corporations will not change on their own. They will not be held accountable on their own. Many states in the colonial West have no interest in holding themselves accountable, let alone their corporations. So we need to push them. We need to make them. We've done that as citizens, as civil society around the world, in the South African case, in the Vietnam War, in so many other cases. When people power reaches a tipping point, it can compel members of parliament and political parties and eventually governments to stop their complicity. I was personally part of the anti-apartheid, South African anti-apartheid movement when I went to university in the United States, and we made our university divest despite all the odds against us. This black-led movement led to divestment. So what Albanese is saying is that we hold the power in our hand. When governments fail to comply with their obligations under international law, they're not just destroying tens of thousands of Palestinian lives, they're destroying international law, the very pillars of international law that existed since World War II. So every one of us has a responsibility within our sphere of influence. Everyone is part of a community that can impact that community to divest, to boycott, and eventually to pressure for sanctions.
Vania, with technology being so ubiquitous in all of our lives, do consumers need to change the way we think about big tech companies and how we use their products and services? I mean, you and I are talking now via a Microsoft product. It's difficult, isn't it, to divest yourself of a company like that?
Yeah, 100%. These companies have become such integrated parts of our lives that it's hard to step away from, especially in this digital age where we've moved to remote work. But, for decades, we've thought of these tech companies as forces for good and the creators of innovation that will drive humanity forward. We've idolized the CEOs like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, as beacons of what success looks like in the tech industry. But if there's anything that this report has revealed, it's that this entire industry is deeply, deeply integrated in the military-industrial complex. Usually when we think of weapons manufacturers, most of us think of the typical Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, Boeing, etc. But in this digital and AI age, we need to reframe our understanding of the role that tech companies play in the continuation of apartheid and genocide and violence. Cloud and AI have become just as deadly as bombs and bullets in the 21st century. And all of these tech companies that we think of as drivers for change, they're all weapons manufacturers in disguise with decades-long ties to the U.S. military-industrial complex. And the CEOs behind these companies are ultimately war profiteers. And it's not just Microsoft, it's Google and Amazon, it's Palantir and Meta and all of the companies that are named in the report. All of these AI companies that are powering our daily lives with each day. And this movement really requires a shift in our understanding of the whole tech industry. And that can only be done when we band together and show how consistent this pattern is across these companies that are so willing to continually prioritize profits over people every single time. And the demands that we make of these companies hold true no matter which company it is. We need an arms embargo, which includes digital weapons and technology. of all complicit tech companies. We need these companies to immediately divest and cut ties with the military complex. And we need pressure and legal consequences for the CEOs who are allowing all of this to happen.
Michael, as Vanya mentioned there, let's come in, please, Omar. Yeah.
Yes, I think Vanya mentions a very important point, that those tech products have become dual use. They have military applications, and they should be designated as dual use items regulated by the United Nations, the Arms Treaty, and so on. Another point, you mentioned about Microsoft. We may not be able today to boycott all Microsoft products. You're absolutely right. It has a near monopoly status in some places. But the BDS movement in networking with Microsoft workers for Palestinian rights decided that Xbox, the gaming part of the Microsoft conglomerate, is its most vulnerable part, where there's a lot of competition and we can really hurt it. And that's why the BDS movement has called for a boycott of Xbox, the gaming business of Microsoft. And it's a very profitable business. And Microsoft is already showing the beginning of feeling the hate, actually.
Michael, as Vanya was saying, the report mentions 39 big international companies who've been providing Israel with equipment and services for its war on Gaza. Those companies are all well aware that Israel is using their products in its mass killings. One of them, Lockheed Martin, says that, quote, foreign military sales are government-to-government transactions. Discussions about those sales are best addressed by the US government. Is that an argument that would stand up in a court of law?
Likely not. Certainly one that has any appreciation for the breadth of international criminal law in these circumstances. A court such as the International Criminal Court, which pays attention to issues of war crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression, and genocide, would not think highly of that kind of argument. At the end of the day, corporations may well be judged standing on their own, either in a domestic court or an international court, for the actions they've taken or not taken. And as you've implied in your question, I mean, with Francesca Albanese's report, it's very clear what she's laying out is this very strong link between the sales of these companies, either big tech or big weapons, to Israel. They all know what the consequences are. They all know that there's 57,000 killed in Gaza. They all know that the Palestinians are probably the most surveilled people in the entire world through big tech and Israel's use of that. They all know that last July, the International Court of Justice issued an important advisory opinion, which said that the Israeli occupation is unlawful, that it must end as rapidly as possible, and that all countries have the obligation not to aid or assist with respect to the perpetuation of this forever occupation. All of that is now on, if you like, both the political record and the legal record regarding the relationship between these companies and Israeli actions with respect to that. So simply saying, well, we at Lockheed Martin get permission from the United States to send our F-35s to Israel, and we know, even though we know what Israel's using those F-35s for, this is a state-to-state issue. That is an argument that wouldn't fly in any court that has a charge over these kinds of crimes, either internationally or domestically.
Vanya, picking up on what you were saying a few moments ago, what are the implications of the report for smaller tech companies? And we're not talking about the giants here like Microsoft, who supply the military-industrial complex, the ones that build tourism apps, whom the report accuses of facilitating travel to the Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territories. Are they profiting from activities that violate international law and human rights? Are there pathways to accountability for these smaller tech companies?
Yeah, I think ultimately any company that is aiding and abetting in Israel's genocide in Palestine is complicit and needs to be held accountable. I think ultimately the corporations that are named in the report are not going to wake up one day and decide to stop enabling genocide for moral clarity. They are deeply invested financially and politically in their ties with Israel. And the only thing that will move them is public and economic pressure. So that's where the BDS movement becomes crucial. Just like in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, people power really matters here. Boycotts are how we break the illusion of corporate neutrality and how we turn complicity into a liability. And we ultimately need to make it unprofitable for these companies to continue partnering with genocide. Alongside that, we have to continue educating the public. Microsoft loves to brand itself as an ethical, progressive company, and I'm sure these smaller companies as well brand themselves as startups that are driving innovation and working on with scrappy teams and trying to change the future. But the reality is that they are helping Israel wage a digital war on Palestinians. There's no such thing as ethical tech when it's being handed to a military entity.
Omar, final question to you. You're in the occupied Palestinian territories right now. This comes down to a question of ethics, doesn't it? Israel's Prime Minister dismissed the allegations made in Albanese's report as groundless, saying that they're going to join the dustbin of history. I mean, there's a lot of fuss about the report right now. Here we are having this fascinating discussion about it, but ultimately, is it going to change anything?
Yes, of course. It will provide civil society, grassroots movements, justice movements like the BDS movement with a lot more power. It will empower us with legal arguments, with meticulous research to add to what we have and show that those companies must be held accountable because they're part and parcel of the system of colonial oppression, military occupation, apartheid, and genocide. So it is absolutely important. What will end up in the dustbin of history is every fascist regime, every colonial regime, which people will resist and continue to fight to end and dismantle the system of oppression. So we cannot take the attacks on Ms. Albanese as worth the ink they're written in, actually, because they're coming from leaders of genocide and apartheid. How truthful have they been? It really shows that struggles for justice can ultimately prevail. We've shown it over and over again against some of the biggest companies on earth, like Intel. 2 months into the genocide, decided to invest $25 billion in Israel's economy. Because of BDS pressure, among other factors, we nixed that project. It was cancelled. We played a role. So those who believe, BDS is morally good, but is it effective? Oh, yes, it is extremely effective, especially when it's collective, when it's done in tandem, as Vanya said, with workers and justice movements, environmental movements, and so on.
Okay. There, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us, Omar Barghouti, Vanya Agrawal, and Michael Link. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again at any time by going to our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X, our handle there, at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
The Trump administration has imposed sanctions on United Nations Special Rapporteur for Palestine, Francesca Albanese, over her report naming dozens of companies she says are profiting from Israeli occupation and genocide in Gaza. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the sanctions in a social media post Wednesday, stating, quote, Albanese's campaign of political and economic warfare against the United States and Israel will no longer be tolerated, Rubio wrote. Amnesty International blasted the sanctions as a, quote, shameless and transparent attack on the fundamental principles of international justice. Francesca Albanese will join us in a minute. The sanctions were filed after she gave a presentation last week to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva and called on states to impose an arms embargo and cut off trade and financial ties with Israel, which she alleged was, quote, responsible for one of the cruelest genocides in modern history.
If the genocide has not stopped, is not just because there has always been an economy of the occupation. It's because the economy of the occupation has turned into an economy of genocide. And so there have been people and organizations that have profited from the violence, the killing, the maiming, the destruction in Gaza and in other parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, because it's not that the Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are having the happiest time of their life as we speak. In the past 20 months, while the Israeli army, and accompanied by settlers, was devastating Palestinian lives and landscapes, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange soared by 213%, amassing over 220 billion in market gains, including 76.8 billion US dollars in the past month alone. So clearly, for some, genocide is profitable.
For more, we're joined by Francesca Albanese herself, the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory. Her landmark report is headlined From Economy of Occupation to Economy of Genocide. Francesca, we last spoke to you in our New York City studio. You're now in the capital of Slovenia. You've just held a news conference. This news has just come out in the last day that the U.S. is going to sanction you, the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory. Trump has already sanctioned top International Criminal Court officials like the ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan. The ICC has come out with an arrest warrant for both Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the former Israeli Defense Minister. Can you respond to the sanctions against you and what they mean?
Hi, Amy. Hi, Nermin. Thank you for being for having me with you. Would I respond? It seems that this administration is quite allergic to justice, isn't it? I woke up this morning, I could take my shower, I could talk to my kids, I could meet the wonderful people of Slovenia, institutions and ordinary citizens alike without the sound of drones. Yes, I skipped breakfast, but I chose it. I was not starving. I'm not starving. And this is the situation of the people of Gaza. This is what we need to talk about, because what the US is doing, people can make their own assessment of it, is distracting us, is trying to distract us from where our focus should be. What's happening to the Palestinians in what remains, the little that remains of their tormented land, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem.
And could you talk, Francesca, about the fact that this announcement came on while Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C., in fact, his third visit to the United States since Trump came into office in January?
Yeah, in fact, I should correct it. It's not that this administration is allergic to justice. It's attracted to injustice more than justice, because the ICC wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't belong to Washington, D.C. He belongs to The Hague or anywhere else where he can be prosecuted as the ICC has requested. Look, I'm I know the United States is not a member to the Rome Statute, has imposed the sanctions on the ICC, and technically the argument to impose the sanctions against me is that I cooperate with the ICC. Surely so, like anyone who wants justice. The ICC is based on the Rome Statute, and I'm a proud Italian, happy that it was my country and the capital of my country to give the name to the statute of the International Criminal Law Court. That is, this is also the legacy of World War II and the Holocaust. Universal justice starts with that. So look at the paradox. But again, I'm more horrified that my own country, Italy, and Greece and France, 3 member states of the Rome Statute, allowed ICC wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity Benjamin Netanyahu to fly with his airplane toward Washington D.C. over their souls, because this is unacceptable. They should have not given such a concession. He must be arrested.
So, Francesca, let's go to your report, the UN report, From Economy of Occupation to Economy of Genocide. When we had you on last year in October, you were working on a report. The report had just come out on genocide as colonial erasure. You've also issued another report, Anatomy of a Genocide. So explain why and when you moved your focus to the economic beneficiaries of what's been happening in Gaza.
Yeah, look, I decided to investigate the private sector in February 2023 when I went to Norway, and for the first time I saw what many had already been investigating and denouncing, the BDS movement, Don't Buy Into the Occupation, Profundo, Somo, Who Profits, and the fact that there were people making business in the system, within the system of the military occupation that Israel was maintaining over the occupied Palestinian territory. Now, it really, as someone has said, only a lawyer can take ages to realize the political economics of the occupation. But however, 2 years later, I was into the investigation of all the companies that I had started to collect information about. 2 years later, because in the middle there was a genocide, I needed to make sense of the military assault that since October 2023, Israel had launched against the Gaza Strip, while also accelerating the annexation and the ethnic cleansing in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. And as I collected together with my team and all the actors that contributed, the lawyers, investigative journalists, and others who contributed to the acquisition of information that I verified, to the setup of a database of 1,000 entities, of which I just collected those eminent cases that help illustrate the system. So, Amy, my report is not to be read as a duplicate of the database that the UN has set up years ago and is updating. It's illustrative of a system, an economy of occupation. Israel would have not been able to maintain the military occupation without the support, the means, the weapons, the machinery, the technology, the legitimacy that has come, including from the pension funds, including the Norwegian pension funds, the legitimacy of the universities, and so on and so forth.
I want to go to last month. Norway's largest pension fund, what you're referring to, known as KLP, announced it would no longer invest in 2 companies that sell equipment to the Israeli military. The pension fund managing the savings of about 900,000 Norwegian municipal workers. Democracy Now! Spoke to Kiran Aziz, head of responsible investments at KLP, about how they came to the decision.
KLP, as Norway's largest pension company, has decided to exclude companies Oshkosh Corporation and Tyson Group due to their sales of weapons to the Israeli military. KLP learned from a report conducted by the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights that several companies were supplying weapons or equipment to the Israeli Defense Force, and these weapons are being used in Gaza. On the basis of this information, KLP has done a thorough assessment of the companies, but also engaged in dialogue with them in order to understand what kind of due diligence they have performed. And like in all other situations, companies have an independent duty to exercise due diligence in order to avoid complicity. But based on our assessment, these companies have failed to demonstrate any due diligence at all. And these companies are also having a long-standing collaboration with the IDF, and weapons delivered have continued after the outbreak of the war in Gaza. Exclusion is an important tool for us to reduce KLP's association with unacceptable conditions that are ongoing or likely to occur in the future. But exclusion is also a way to hold companies accountable, because we all need to respect international law and humanitarian law.
So that was Kiran Aziz, head of responsible investments at KLP. Meanwhile, one of the world's largest shipping companies, Maersk, has recently announced it'll divest from companies linked to illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank following a sustained pressure campaign called Mask Off Maersk that was led by Palestinian Youth Movement. This is Nadia Tanous, international coordinator of the campaign.
This is a huge win for the movement. Maersk is the Danish logistics giant. They're one of the largest companies on the planet, and they are the first logistics company ever to cease transportation of settlement goods, all settlement products, into the Israeli settlements and out of the Israeli settlements. I think that this is a large step, a first step to isolating the Israeli settlements from the global economy, which decreases their ability to terrorize the Palestinian people, to annex more land, and to continue to break international law. We also were able to ascertain this win not because we demanded divestment from the settlements, but because we lifted the political ceiling and we demanded a people's arms embargo. Maersk is still complicit in the transshipment of arms and weapons components of military cargo to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. They're endemic to the supply chain of the F-35 bomber, which is one of the most expensive and deadliest weapons on the market. And that's why Maersk, this news came the same week as the Francesca Albanese report, which details at length multiple corporations that are complicit in the genocide of the Palestinian people and profiting off of that genocide. Maersk is one of them.
So that's Nadia Tanous of the Palestine Youth Movement. Francesca Albanese, as you listen to both women from Norway and taking on the Danish company Maersk, if you can talk about the other companies that you've been targeting, and if these U.S. sanctions are going to change your approach.
Let me share an anecdote because this is really telling. I've been engaging with a major newspaper who refused to report on my report because it was not accurate, and it was not accurate, not solid enough because I had used this as a source, this particular report, the work that this youth movement has done. And you see the condescending attitude of the West and the saviorism that we carry. The youth movement is associated with lack of expertise. I'm so glad that the world is changing and we are in the hands, with this young generation, we are in better hands. What I want to reflect on as listening, as answering your question, Amy, is something that Nadia said, meaning it's the endemic. There are certain services that companies are providing that go to something that is endemic, to the illegal occupation, to the apartheid structure that Israel has maintained over the years, over the Palestinians, and now has even turned genocidal. And it's the fact that when people have concentrated their attention without any result on settlements are clearly at the heart of the problem, but they're entrenched in the Israeli system. The universities have been legitimizing and giving even means, they've been transferring funds and endowments to the Israeli occupation and very ideology of erasure of the Palestinian people. This is why I say there is no neutral sector when it comes to Israel as the state, which has maintained for 57 years an unlawful occupation. And when you look at the water sector, the electricity, for example, there is one grid, there is one way of extracting and exploiting Palestinian resources, and then depriving the Palestinians of them. This is why today I do not call for sanctions on individuals and on companies producing in the settlements. This is the past century. This is the old Bible. This is what we have to do today, is to act like intelligent people and realize that if Israel is accused in different international proceedings of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and even genocide, it's Israel as a state which is to face the consequences, including sanctions and cutting economic ties with Israel as a state.
So, Francesca Albanese, we just have 30 seconds, but if you could talk about, and then we'll continue with you after the program for a taped show, if you could say to what extent you were inspired by the divestment campaign against apartheid South Africa. You spoke about that at the UN.
Certainly I was, of course, but not much. I was more inspired. Not that I was not inspired. It's just that what led me was the need to understand the occupation and the apartheid. And then the campaign made sense to me against apartheid South Africa and against apartheid Israel. Takes time to a lawyer.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.
An economy of occupation just turned into an economy of genocide. The Tel Aviv Stock Exchange has increased its value 179%, 70 billion in the last month alone. Why? Arms manufacturers and security/surveillance system has been profiteering a lot through the customization of weaponry and how Israel has perfected certain techniques of surveillance or hitting, killing Palestinians throughout this genocidal war. Palestine has always been a laboratory for Israel, and Israel must be understood as a military state. In order to preserve itself as an ethno-state, it has had to rely significantly on the use of force, on military force. And the Palestinians have provided an endless pool of resources on which to test surveillance techniques, technology, and other kinds of weapons with zero accountability, zero scrutiny, and a lot of return. One people enriched and another erased. Israel's economy is a business of erasure, of elimination. 60,000 people have been killed. Over 100,000 have been maimed. 1/3 of the killed ones are children. The harm that has been done to the Palestinians is enormous and can hardly be met by justice. However, there is something absolutely abominable in the way this genocide has been committed. This is a genocide that has been enforced through weaponry, technology, and surveillance systems of the 21st century. If I look back right now, after 3 years of this mandate as a special rapporteur, I see a continuum in various pieces of work that I've done. Israel has violated the right of self-determination of the Palestinians, like the rights to exist on the little land that remains to them, politically, culturally, economically. It has strangled the possibility for them to have an economy by controlling their resources, land, water, fuel, gas, and diverting them and the profits that others could make out of them toward itself. And this is why I insist today we need to stop feeding this illusion that there is a good Israel and a bad Israel, a good Israel with whom it's okay to do business, while if you cross the green line and you get into the colonies, then it becomes problematic. No, it's Israel which commits violations of the right of self-determination, which maintains an unlawful occupation, which advances annexation, and therefore it's Israel which today must face sanctions, divestment, and based on what civil society is increasingly and successfully doing, boycotts. The report exposes an economy of occupation which has turned into an economy of genocide. For decades, Israel has advanced its settler colonial project, enabled, facilitated, supported by a network of private entities, which range from the arms sector, Elbit system, Lockheed Martin, surveillance sector, Palantir, whose tools, techniques, and equipment have been used to forcibly displace the Palestinians from their lands, to destroy their lands and livelihoods, their homes, and then to segregate and surveil them with walls, fences, CCTV cameras, etc. And then
they have been replaced. So they have been displaced and replaced, and in a way in which the private sector has proven instrumental in creating a new habitat, a new ecosystem made of homes, services, infrastructures, where Israeli Jews and others and their partners, their associates, have replaced the Palestinians. Think of the construction of the colonies, roads, water and electricity infrastructure, extracting Palestinian natural resources, and then producing goods and services and circulating them, connecting to a domestic, regional and international sets of markets. If Palestine was a crime scene, it would have the fingerprints of all of us. So, for example, Airbnb and Booking.com advertised properties on land that settlers and the State of Israel have stolen from the Palestinians. We continue to normalize the occupation through a click. And this is not even the end of the story, because there has been a network, a web of enablers made of banks like BNP or Barclays, financial entities like BlackRock and Vanguard, and even universities which have lended legitimacy and financial means, funds, endowments to the system to thrive, so that Israel could continue business as usual. It is displacement and replacement of the Palestinians in a vicious circle. Now, I could have written this report decades ago. And still, what has happened now is that instead of disengaging from this economy of occupation, which is unlawful, and we need to understand the legal framework there, because it implies responsibility and possibly liability of companies and their executives, is that instead of disengaging, these companies have maintained their entwinement with this economy and have even profited more. Hyundai has been providing machinery that has been used to demolish Palestinian infrastructure in the West Bank. And now that machinery is being used to pulverize Gaza. Same with Volvo. Volvo has been providing buses used to connect colonies and the colonies to Israel. Or thinks of the weaponry that has been enhanced and rendered more sophisticated through the support of artificial intelligence and other technologies in order to become more lethal at a reduced cost of life for the Israelis, like unmanned technologies, quadcopters, killing drones. So all this has generated an incredible economy, very high profits. But also think of the water industry or the dairy industry that should have complained for losing the market that Gaza represented, right? No, they've not made a peep because ideologically they support what the State of Israel is doing. And universities have not disentangled from partnership with Israeli universities or with the Israeli defense sector and other forms of research in the name of neutrality. But there is nothing neutral, nothing innocent in engaging with a state which commits and is accused of committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So this is the red line that companies have continued to cross with knowledge, intent, and purpose. And so this is why I say these people have no realization, no sense of what has been going on in Gaza. I mean, the harm that has been done in Gaza, or if they do, they support it. And this is why I say they must be held accountable. And of course, the companies can say, well, but what can I do? It's Israel making the use it wants of our goods. Yes, but you are enabling it. You are profiting from an unlawful endeavor. The fact of being directly linked to this economy and meshes you in an economy of occupation. And if you're not held accountable in courts, well, you will have face accountability through the choice of your consumers. The strength of this report is in how it explains and exposes a system of entanglement and complicity of private actors with an unlawful endeavor. The International Court of Justice says that the occupation is unlawful, it should be withdrawn totally and unconditionally. And so the question is, how can ever be envisaged that the private sector can do what is prohibited to states, like recognizing the legal consequences of an unlawful act, which is criminal, and trading, aiding and abetting, supporting this unlawful endeavor? This is why I say the only legal legal move that companies can make is unplugging, just pulling out of their entanglement with Israel. Private entities are allowed to get away with their violations of international law because this is what they've always done. Historically, private entities have been enablers and drivers of settler colonial enterprises, dispossession, dismemberment, and subjugation of entire nations. Indigenous peoples bear like living testament of this. Palestinians are the last to be genocided in the pursuit of profit. However, as the post-Holocaust industrialist trials marked the end of an era of full lack of accountability, and South Africa post-apartheid has advanced the development of a normative framework to regulate the conduct of business. This is the test. Palestine is forcing us to take the opportunity to test that legal framework and to make sure that whatever businesses have done until now, meaning pursuing profits without zero accountability and zero scrutiny, changes once and for all. People who are enriching themselves out of this catastrophe have to be looked for everywhere they are and held accountable. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is a slap in the face of 80 years of multilateralism and humanitarian assistance. Whatever they're doing is not aid. It's a shame to call it aid. How come that the state that is accused of committing acts of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity against the Palestinians, including using starvation as a weapon of war, is the state that is allowed to distribute food to the Palestinians? All the more, whatever that thing, the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is, it looks more like a joint criminal enterprise with zero accountability, zero scrutiny, but especially zero purpose, because first of all, aid is a complex endeavor. It's not just throwing bags of flour at people. There are reports that refer to the presence of pills that appear to be narcotics in the flour, but also the way the flour is distributed. It's a punch in the face of the principle of dignity, humanity, doing no harm, and it's absolutely undignified. The only recommendation I have, and I urge member states to do that, break the blockade yourself. Every state which has ports in the Mediterranean area, European states and Arab states must send their navy with humanitarian personnel and humanitarian supplies for the people of Gaza. Enough of them starving, being killed, tormented day and night. This nightmare must end. For the Palestinians, for the Israelis, and for what remains of our humanity. A ceasefire is not the answer, especially according to the Israeli way of observing ceasefires, where others seize, Israel fires. This is how ceasefires are normally implemented. This is not about ceasefire. The paradigm needs to shift from self-defense, whatever it is, to self-determination. I'm really worried also about how member states, from Arab states to Western states, are discussing the reconstructions of Gaza. This is not a business. We need to recover a population which is surviving genocide, and we need to heal them. We will also need to take care and heal the Israelis who have committed this genocide, because this is a society that, when it will realize what it has done, will face a moral collapse, but they will also have to face accountability for what they have done. Look, there is no other way to stop the genocide than stopping it. The genocide and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from what remains of Palestine will not stop by inertia. It must be stopped, and international law has in itself the roadmap to end it. End the genocide now. End the occupation by September this year, because this is what the General Assembly, upon the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, has decided, and then end apartheid. Whatever political solutions Palestinians and Israelis will decide, it cannot be anything else than full rights and freedoms for anyone, regardless of their religious or political, cultural identity, between the river and the sea. Meanwhile, private and public actors, from government officials to CEOs of companies, have to be held accountable. The role that civil society, lawyers, private sectors, and anyone as a consumer or as part of a public or private institution can play is enormous. Use your role to bring accountability forward. We do build change at every step, and this is the moment to prove it. May this be the last genocide in human history, and may this be the last crime that is committed against the Palestinians. Look, I have one regret, not to have investigated media as the first corporate entity which should be held accountable, but it's coming. So thank you, independent media, to do what corporate media has not been able to do, telling the truth.
Okay, let's bring in Mohammed El-Masri. He's a professor of media studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Joins us from Minneapolis in the United States. Mohammed, great to have you with us again. Good to see you. So what do you make of this report saying that some of the world's largest companies are complicit? And do you think this will give momentum to potential sanctions on Israel?
Well, it's a very significant report. There's no question. It's very well documented. There's a lot of evidence provided, and I thought that it was interesting that Albanese names more than 40 companies across a wide variety of industries. And it's not just the typical, what comes to mind is, weapons manufacturers, but there are a variety of industries here, banking and financial institutions, and obviously big tech companies that we're all very well acquainted with, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and others. And these are companies that spend a lot of money on public relations, on managing their reputations. So they will not be happy, obviously, turning up in this report. So all of the legal accountability or potential legal accountability aside, this is going to be bad public relations for those companies, especially if they turn up on boycott lists, and some of them already are on boycott lists. And certainly that's the kind of pressure that can work and that has worked to at least some extent.
All right, it can work, and it has worked in the past indeed, but is it going to come into play here? Because this is just a report from Albanese at this point in time. Do you think it is going to, try and build momentum?
Yeah, well, I think a case is being made, or multiple cases are being made against Israel. And what's been happening over the past 22 months, Nick, is that report after report after report has been produced to help make this case against Israel. And there already is an impact. It's hard to see because in the short term and in the here and now, the genocide is ongoing. The occupation is ongoing. But Israel has taken a major hit in terms of its international standing, and these companies now stand to take a major hit. I think the lesson here is that it's becoming very expensive to support Israel through its worst atrocities.
One thing that will certainly stop what we're seeing is a ceasefire. There's a lot of chatter about the potential of a deal that's now building momentum, but there are still fundamental obstacles on both sides, of course.
Absolutely. Nick, you and I have spoken many times over the past year and a half plus about the potential for a ceasefire. And the main sticking point continues to be whether or not Israel will agree to a permanent end to the war. That's obviously Hamas's main position, and Israel wants to maintain the right to go back to war. So that's kind of a non-starter for Hamas and for the Palestinians. They want an end, a complete end, a permanent end to this nightmare. So it remains to be seen, but there may be an opportunity here because the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, is going to go into about a 3-month recess starting here in a few weeks. And it will be less politically costly for Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire during that time, because it's difficult to dissolve the parliament during that time. So I think there's potentially light at the end of the tunnel. I don't want to say I'm optimistic, but I think there's a chance.
All right, Mohammed, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much indeed, Mohammed El-Masri. Talking to us there from Minneapolis in the United States. Thanks a lot. Well, let's get on to the situation with this Associated Press report, which shows that American security contractors working for the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have used live ammunition and stun grenades against Palestinians as they try to get food. We're going to talk now to Dr. Tarek Loubani, who's an emergency physician and medical director of GLEAR International, joins us now from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. And so, Tarek, we talk about some of your own experiences around the kind of wounds you're treating. You're seeing a lot of the victims, including very, very young children. Just tell us what you're seeing, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I just came from a mass casualty incident in which literally hundreds of people came from one of these aid sites. Anytime the Palestinians try to approach aid or try to get aid, they are fired upon. There's no sense in which Palestinians are being allowed to access any of the necessities of life. Now, what kinds of injuries did I see? I don't even need to wonder what it's been like for the last week. I can tell you what happened today. There were patients who I saw with gunshots to the head, gunshots to the neck, gunshots to everywhere else. The gunshots to the head and neck are almost always targeted, shot by snipers. The gunshots to the other parts of the body tend to be when I ask the patients, because there was spread shot. Essentially, somebody pulled the trigger on a machine gun and just sprayed the entire crowd. Also, there are explosive injuries, lots of explosive injuries, in which either there's artillery shelling, direct artillery shelling. There wasn't in this particular mass casualty incident, or as in this exact mass casualty incident, there's the dropping of bombs from quadcopters. There is every manner of depravity that's involved in the GHF. The way in which they lure people in, the way in which, patients tell me, well, I have to go because I'm starving, because my kids are starving. And every single patient who I treat is skin and bones. I mean, it's stuff that I've only ever seen in textbooks when I was in medical school and on history channels when I was growing up. It's absolutely unbelievable and disgusting.
Horrifying. And it's very evident to you, Tarek, that people are indeed being directly targeted, even by sniper fire. So snipers picking out people as they're going to get food and shooting them dead.
There's every kind of attack. Like, that's one of the things that makes GHF so hard to miss. As medical people, very often we're in situations in which we wonder, hey, what was the intent here? What exactly was happening? But in this specific case, it's obvious. For example, patients can sometimes be sitting there and doing nothing, waiting for the site to open, and then they get shot in the head. I've seen that numerous times. Patients can be lined up. Often they get lined up and brought into these very compressed spaces, and then they get fired on, just spread shot fire where somebody pulls the trigger on a machine gun. They have artillery fire on them. I mean, it is deliberate. There is no doubt. I did not need to see the AP video to know that it was deliberate. The patients tell me, the injury patterns tell me, the ways in which people are killed, the numbers, the massive numbers in which they are killed tell me. So there is no doubt on any front that the GHF is involved in this. And on top of that, you can look at the way in which they're speaking. The GHF is making these denials that are delusionally obscene. For example, saying that, I'm sure many of your audience have seen a video in which one of these heavily armed GHF people sits there or stands there talking about how everything is so super safe while there's literal machine gun fire in the background. So we see evidence from every front and every plane.
All right.
The last one well is how, if I could just say one more point.
Of course.
The way and the kind of food that's being distributed, it's not nutritious, it's not healthy, and that takes us to the problem of baby formula, which is not being distributed and not even being allowed to be distributed. There's no doubt that what GHF is doing is perpetuating the famine and the starvation with a thin veneer of basically some terrible game of chance and luck for people who try to get some food.
Right, and given the horror, it is absolute horror of what you describe, and it's not the first time we've heard it. It is just bewildering to me that there is not more outrage, at the top level of the international community.
Nick, there is a lot of outrage. There is absolutely a lot of outrage. Every single NGO that works in Gaza, every single NGO, pretty much international.
Global leadership.
Yeah, I mean, they've been running the genocide, actively participating. My own government in Canada is an active participant in this genocide. So is, I don't know what government is yours, but almost certainly if it's a Western government, they are. I think they're not outraged because they're active participants and they're happy with the thin veneer. And that leaves it to us, the NGOs, like our NGO, which signed on, Amnesty International, and many others, and to civil society to put a stop to this and to absolutely insist that it can't go on.
Indeed. All right, Tarek, it's a grim testimony, but we thank you for bringing it to us here at Al Jazeera. Tarek Al-Lubani speaking to us there from Gaza. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.